Say that you have a patient that comes in the office and you suspect that they have an environmental illness. How do you know what the exact environmental toxin is? We asked Dr. Aviad Elgez to talk us through the differential diagnosis for the top 5 most common environmental illnesses. Enjoy.
I've been in practice for the last 9 years or so, and in the last 5 years I've focused a lot on environmental medicine. And in these last 5 years, one of the focus that I've had is neurotoxicity. It's something we see very commonly in practice. So I've sort of narrowed down the primary, most common neurotoxic exposures that we have into a sort of differential diagnosis picture to help other practitioners figure out what are they seeing in practice. So the most common 2 types of neurotoxins that we see are going to be solvents and mold, beyond a doubt. So I'll give you the highlights of what are the main key to look at. There's a lot of different symptoms, a lot of neurotoxicity, immunotoxicity, endocrine disruption, mitochondrial disruption. But just for today, here are the key differentiation factors for neurotoxicity for these. So solvents, what we're looking at really is that balance issue. So people who are breathing in fumes, imagine the off-gassing the VOCs, bringing in paint. You get sort of a little bit of spaciness, a lot of brain fog, and a lot of balance issues, as well as some neuropathy. You'll see people with like burning pain sometimes, and numbness and tingling. So that's one of the key features. Now, if somebody goes away on vacation, a lot of these symptoms can go away if they go for long enough of a time, and considering they're not exposed to other solvents like memory foam, sometimes a brand new memory foam in the hotel can actually continue the exposure if they're sensitive to that. So what happens is solvents are not persistent in our body. It clears it pretty fast. So a lot of these non-persistent pollutants, after a few days, a few weeks of that exposure is gone, the symptoms will go away, they'll come back home, and the symptoms will come back with the exposures. The other thing to look at here then is mold. Mold is very similar in solvents in the sense that you go away from the exposure, you'll see these ups and downs of the symptoms coming and going. With regards to the symptoms though, even though you have a lot of similar symptoms like that brain fog as you do in solvents, and you might get that fatigue. Actually, across the board, almost all of these have fatigue, so I won't mention that too many times, but fatigue is there. You'll have this fatigue, you'll have this sometimes neuropathy as well for a mold. The other thing that you'll see specifically with mold that you don't see as much with solvents is you'll get a lot of that congestion. You get the sort of sinusitis, chronic congestion. The other thing that is very prevalent in mold is that recurrent infections, respiratory tract infections. You'll see that with solvents as well, but a lot more with mold at the same time. So that's one of the biggest concerns is sort of a pattern that we see of neurotoxicity with immunotoxicity and the congestion picture of mold. Mercury is the other common picture that we see a lot, and a lot of people in practice are looking for it. It's not as common as people think, but when we do find it, it's pretty clear, and the symptoms are there. As sort of the key symptom that I like to look at is irritability and anxiety. You do get that fatigue, you do get that brain fog for Mercury, but you get this irritable kind of picture, especially somebody who wasn't irritable at a certain point in their life and they're gradually getting worse. That is where you're going to see that picture of Mercury. You also get muscle pains as well, muscle aches. And one of the key things with Mercury is that it's persistent. So you don't have that concern where it comes and goes. It's always there. You go on vacation, that anxiety, the muscle pain, that fatigue is still there. You come back home, there's nothing changed. The other common exposure for neurotoxins that we have in our practice often is organophosphate pesticides. And these are the most common pesticides that are sprayed on our food, on our produce right now. The neurotoxic picture of these organic phosphate pesticides are more of that sort of chronic exposure. The acute exposure that we see it in farmers, we see it when there are spills, or people who live next to farms will get that a little bit, but it's really going to be that prenatal exposure and that early development. Things like autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, that's very common and very much connected in the research for organophosphate pesticides. But you also have it in adults over the long term, so that chronic neurodegeneration showing up in things like depression, over the long term, and also Parkinson's or extrapyramidal symptoms like tremors and so on. So you'll see that with organophosphates in the long run. Now, the last two here I'll combine together because they're very similar. That's PCBs and chlorinated pesticides. So those ones, they don't have a lot of neurological symptoms as a whole. There's a lot of cancers and a lot of endocrine disruption going on there. But from a neurotoxic perspective, both of these are linked with more of the chronic degeneration conditions like Parkinson's specifically is very well linked with both of these, as well as just dementias in general. So I think we're going to see more and more of these sort of chronic neurodegeneration over the years, lifelong exposures, especially from farmers. That's very much linked. I know we're exposed to these as well. If we have genetic SNPs where we can't handle these or poor detoxification pathways, you'll see this in the common, everyday person in your practice.